The need for energy is increasing, but we are rapidly running out of resources. We need to create an inexhaustible source of energy that is always there, independent of wind or the sun. Instead, an infinitely renewable source of energy that is available any place, any time. Sounds impossible, right? Viktor Schauberger says it is possible. Well, he said it, because he is not with us anymore. But his ideas live on. Schauberger was a forest caretaker and an inventor born in Austria. He spent his life inventing devices based on his observations in nature. Fascinated by the behavior of water, he thought of a device that was able to generate an endless amount of energy by using the natural properties of water. Unfortunately, he was limited by the technical possibilities of his time. Since then, a lot has changed. Computer simulations and production methods like 3D printing have enabled us to take the next step in realizing Schauberger's dreams. That is why we have begun experimenting with a device based on Schauberger's documentation of the behavior of water in nature. To generate energy, the device uses a couple of Schauberger's ideas. The natural acceleration of water is one of them. First, a conical spiral tube is placed over a water basin. Then, we start the generator by transporting water through the central tube. When it reaches the top, the water runs down the spiral and gravity accelerates the water. The moving water should create a suction strong enough to automatically transport water from the basin to the top spiral. The water that comes out of the outlet starts moving the water in the basin. If Schauberger's principles are correct, the water will accelerate. By placing a small turbine at the bottom of the basin, we decrease the acceleration to a continuously running water flow. The movement of the turbine can be transformed into clean and renewable energy without having to store it. We believe this device has great potential. This device might help us overcome one of the biggest challenges we are facing today: the need for clean energy. Lots of clean energy. Help us realize this fascinating idea. Share your knowledge.
Something like a ceiling fan. Now, propeller blades spin on a 2D flat plane. The angles of the blades might be tilted a little bit, but all in all, the blade itself spins on a 2D flat plane. The image on the lower right is the path that it traces while traveling in the air, or traveling through space. The propeller spins and it traces that path, like an Archimedes screw. But the difference between a propeller and an Archimedes screw is that the screw is the actual shape that the propeller blade traces. So the propeller blade just spins in 2D, but it's traveling forward. So the propeller traces that shape. But the Archimedes screw is the actual shape. So that's a main difference between a propeller and an impeller. Propeller spins in 2D, impeller spins in 3D. Another big difference between a propeller and an impeller is that the propeller pushes outwardly and an impeller pushes inwardly. It doesn't pull, it doesn't attract or suck anything in. It's pushed in the inverse direction through the impeller. It's the inverse push. And because it pushes inwardly, it creates an inward vortex. So you take a vortex, you spin a vortex, and you make another one. If you take a propeller and you spin it, it's being ejected outward radially, all that energy. And if you move forward, you're going to trace a helical trajectory. But if you actually form an object to a helix, then you spin that, it's going to be even more beneficial.
As you saw there, that two-dimensional approach in a three-dimensional world is why we lose so much energy. It's not accumulating, it's dissipating. And clearly, we have created tools that do not consider the third aspect of our world and therefore lose the ability to generate much more energy. As Walter Russell put it, all motion is curved and all direction is spiral. Let's now have a look at what Jay Harman has to say.
I designed this boat that was very effective, and I thought, well, I've created this neat little boat that's mass-produced, and a lot of people are buying it, and a lot of people that have never had a boat before, so I thought, I need to put a better propeller on it. What I did was, I froze the whirlpool in your bathtub. If you can imagine doing that, right? Well, this is a frozen whirlpool. And this is the archetypal shape of movement in our known universe. And every field of movement in our universe shares the same algorithm that the whirlpool in your bathtub has. Okay, so that's the starting point. And now we have a whole bunch of physicists and engineers that work on these algorithms and adapting them into the industrial world. Now, if you take this pattern and once you've got the algorithm and you grow these shapes, they actually open up and they turn into things that look like this, which is now a tidal or a wind turbine. If you keep growing them, they fold around themselves and they turn into something that looks like this. We call this our tulip pump. It's actually a pump. Everything from spiral galaxies to weather patterns, whirlpools, particle decay and particle accelerators, and of course every living thing. And you know, if you this is Bryce Canyon, but if you put a lump of flat concrete in a river long enough, it'll turn into something that looks like that, because that has got less drag than a flat plate. This is an electron microscope photograph of a human skin pore. Nature's ultimate air conditioning system. And look at that. You've got a seashell and a tornado. You got a seashell and a whirlpool. And there's a firestorm. Exactly the same shape as a whirlpool. Because that's how heat moves as well. And look at this one. This is a seashell. And this is the cochlea of your ear. And this is DNA. DNA is not a parallel-sided thing. We see it as parallel-sided, but it's not. It's logarithmic. It's the same shape as this. So there's no exceptions. There it is there, and it looks like the X-ray of a lily. And we put that in a huge tank of water, and there's our device. And there's our competitor's device. And we do the job better. And we put that in a huge tank of water, and there's our device. And there's our competitor's device. And we do the job better.
As you noticed, that wasn't a video mistake. I played that small clip twice because it is imperative to energy generation that we take note of the sheer size of the difference of those two units and the energy input it takes to shift the same amount of water. Let's listen to some more of what Jay has to say.
Everything in nature has 3 dimensions. Most of our science is really dealing with 2 dimensions, and most of our tools are as well. So you can see the spiral here in the end. That's a pretty familiar spiral you see in your whirlpool. And that's easily understood, but it's 2 dimensions. It's this dimension and this dimension. But look, we've got a 3rd dimension. And you can see it's changing in the 3rd dimension. That's very complicated. I mean, it's infinitely complicated. So I think the world must change to this type of thinking, otherwise it's all over. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Now, I don't know if any of you has yet to make the connection regards tapping into the energy Jay's small Lily impeller system is capable of making based on the compressive implosive forces stated by Walter and Viktor. But I think it about time we took matters into our own hands and took a closer look at how we can utilise this fact of nature and start to leave the entropic approach behind. I'm going to play you another snippet, again from Jay's clip, since I think most, if not all of you, will make the same connection as I did. Listen carefully to what Jay states in an almost matter-of-fact statement, and yet, as far as we are concerned, It's a phenomenal breakthrough in energy independence.
Leonardo da Vinci said, if you don't copy nature, you're wasting your time. Right? So here is the most profound, incredible teacher that we could possibly even imagine. Billions of years of research and development and an unlimited budget. Trillions and trillions and trillions of experiments. And so that blueprint and that model is all there for us to use.
Because I had a frozen whirlpool, I was able to create a whirlpool. So one of the first things that I used it on, particularly in America, there are great big holding tanks. Well, that water gets stagnant. The municipalities that manage that water have to put chlorine and chloramines into the water. The problem is better solved by mixing that water. Generally throughout the world, if you want to mix water, it's very expensive. I put one of these frozen whirlpools in the bottom of one of these tanks, 6 inches high, 4 inches wide, and I rotated it with a couple of 100 watts of power, a couple of light bulbs of power, and I found it was able to mix an entire tank of water, 10 million gallons, which from an engineering point of view is not even conceivably possible. 6 inches high, 4 inches wide, and I rotated it with a couple of 100 watts of power, a couple of light bulbs of power, and I found it was able to mix an entire tank of water, 10 million gallons, which from an engineering point of view is not even conceivably possible.
Now, just to clarify, that amount of water quoted by Jay, I checked into the average capacity of a water tower and it is actually 1 million gallons, which is why I corrected him. There is not a water tower on Earth that could hold 10 million gallons, and the weight alone would be absolutely colossal. It would actually work out at over 44,000 tons of water. So I assume he made a simple mistake while talking to the interviewer and said 10 million instead of 1 million. So now let us run the calculations based on 1 million gallons, the average of a water tower. I'm not the mathematician here, so no doubt some of you will be far more adept at it than I. The Vortex impeller device Jay created, which was able to move 1 million gallons of water, we need to work out the kinetic energy of that volume of water being driven by just 200 watts. And rather than get into a debate over the physics, which as far as I'm concerned is based upon the explosive science and not the implosive science, it is clear that if we use the spiral-shaped impeller with the capacity of moving a massive weight and volume of water, we need to take a closer look at what that equates to in terms of potential kinetic energy. And this obviously has certain consequences for Newton's second law of motion. Like I said, I'm not the science boffin, so like many of you, I need it to be understood in layman's terms, and for that, let's just have a look at the basics here. So we're on an education site, work, energy and power, the basics. I'm not going to go into all of this information. I just want to give you a quick science lesson because I did exactly the same thing. Work is a transfer of energy. So work is done on an object when you transfer energy to that object. The amount of work done on an object depends on the amount of force exerted on the object and the amount of distance the object moves. Work equals force times distance. According to Newton's second law of motion, the net force on an object is dependent on the mass of the object and its acceleration during movement. Force equals mass times acceleration. The common unit of force is the Newton. 1 Newton is the force required to accelerate 1 kilogram of mass at 1 meter per second And there's the calculation there. The amount of work done to push a 10,000 Newton car a distance of 10 meters would be displayed as such, and it comes out at 100,000 joules. Now we can't work out the joules because the one thing that we're missing from Jay's explanation of when he moved the 10 million gallons was the amount of time it took to get those 10 million gallons in motion in order to figure out just how many joules. But you get the point here, okay? So we're talking about Newton's second law of motion. Let's get back to the episode. The cyclonic or spiral forces, which we have seen, remains in perfect balance with nature, and it seems to be able to contradict Newton's second law of motion. If such a small amount of force, in this case the amount of energy that can light 2 light bulbs, can produce enough force to move 1 million gallons of water, We did not have the amount of time it took to get the water into motion, so we cannot work out what the joules were to establish the eventual motion of that amount of water. But even if we say it took a few hours, we would be way under the amount of potential kinetic energy now available, I suspect. So what does 1 million gallons of water in motion produce in terms of kinetic energy, having only used the 200 watts to get it to the state of running, say, for 6 hours? To create the movement and continue that movement using just those 200 watts. I mean, the bottom line is, how much power can that volume of water generate if tapped by the same type of impeller working to generate electricity? For that, let's take a look at this calculator. In order to do that, we need to know what 1 million gallon of water weighs. So, from a quick water weight converter, I've put in already, as you can see here, 1 million gallons of water. That's 1 with 6 noughts. US gallons, because we're talking about US water towers, into kilograms, and it comes out at 3,785,411.8. So let's just round it up to 3,786,000. Right, let's get back to the other converter. So the other converter is to convert it from kilograms to tons, and let's put it into US tons, because again we're talking about the US system. So as you see, I've put here 3,786,000 kilograms, which is what we got from that previous converter, equals 4,173 US ton. Okay, now let's get back to the episode. So now we know 1 million gallons has a weight of approximately 4,173 tons. Now let's look at the conversion of that to energy output, or should I say potential kinetic energy output. And remember, this is all based on 200 watts input. So what better place to look than Cura as far as, well, not necessarily Cura, but we've got an accountant at Toyota. So if anyone's going to be able to work out the maths for us, it's going to be an accountant. You can do a simple calculation. Gravitational potential energy is given by E equals mgh. Now, he goes in about the joules and everything else, but as I said, we don't have that information. What I want to bring your attention to is after he's done all this, it's at the bottom here. So the final answer is about 1 ton of water falling. Well, the water isn't falling in our case, but it is in motion, in lateral motion. 450 meters per hour. This will give you a continuous output of 1 kilowatt. So 1,000 watts of power every hour in terms of the water falling. Now, obviously, our water is in rotation constantly, and this, remember, we're talking 1 ton of water. And obviously, in our calculation, even though they're talking about 1 ton of falling water here, we're talking about, 4,173 tons of water in motion. 4,173 tons of water in motion. And if this calculation says that, well, 1 ton of water falling 450 meters every hour, falling 450 meters every hour on the hour, this will give you a continuous output of 1 kilowatt. Now, even if we halved that, or we put 1/10 of that information into that, and I'm being deliberately conservative because I don't want anyone to think I'm some kind of tinfoil over unity idiot, but 200 watts in, once that water gets going, and say it's been going for 6 hours, and we know that the weight, the kinetic energy that's contained within that water, with a weight of 4,173 tons, mean you could have a number of Lily style impeller pumps on the inside of that. Even if you only had 4 of those, this is, you see where this is going. Okay, 200 watts to push over 1 million gallons of water weighing 4,173 tons. And if this calculation is correct, 1 ton equals 1 kilowatt falling for every 450 meters, whereas we've got it in constant rotation, then you can see that we've got ourselves a massive excess of energy. Let's get back to the episode. I just thought it'd be amusing and very visual for you to fully comprehend the weight we are talking about, and not just the numbers themselves. Just look at these 4,000-ton comparisons and remember, this is all being shifted and placed into motion by nothing more than 200 watts of power input. Take a look at some of these 4,000-ton comparisons. So how heavy is 4,000 tons? All right, I know it was 4,173, but let's just round it off here. It's about 2/5 as heavy as the Eiffel Tower. It's about 3 times as heavy as a Sierra Redwood. It's about 3/10 as heavy as the Brooklyn Bridge. It's 1/5 as heavy as the Statue of Liberty. It's about 6.5 times as heavy as Christ the Redeemer statue. Wow. It's about 30 times heavier than a house. It's about as 40 times heavy as a blue whale. You get the point, all right? Just wanted to make that point. I mean, 40 blue whales. Holy camole. Let's get back to the episode. The amount of friction or drag these energy-generating impellers would create would not be enough to stop that much kinetic energy from moving, which is why I showed you the comparisons. Do you think a small set of impellers would create enough drag to stop 40 blue whales? I think not. And what if you ran this spiral impeller on a single solar panel that created that motion? What if you fed back the tiny 200 watts once the water was in motion back to the impeller and siphoned off the rest for your house? You could be looking at a self-sustaining system based on vortex creation and implosion that could run for as long as you wish it to. It's crazy to think mankind has been looking for the secrets to perpetual motion and free energy for so long, and yet has, for the most part, ignored Mother Nature, who's been driving that very concept for billions of years. My question is, how long does it take for you to agree on what is perpetual motion? More than 4 billion years? And of course, there will be those who attack me personally, undermining my character, qualifications and so forth, while being very careful to stay well away from actually running any empirical experiment, as Jay has already done. What you have to remember is Jay sells these water tower spiral impellers all over the world and has made a good living out of this and all his other products. So I guess for those of you who ask, is this repeatable? Well, just ask the thousands of customers who have installed and purchased his impellers. Irrespective of the calculations, it seems blatantly obvious that the potential energy output is far greater than the energy it took to create that kinetic energy, and that is all down to the heroes of history we've been ignoring for far too long. I in no way assume to take credit for any of this. As I said at the outset, it is we who stand on the shoulders of these heroes of history. I'm simply sharing the observations and trying to place them in a practical way to make the simplest solution to generating power using the forces of nature of those great men. This system of energy generation uses existing technologies, and one can only speculate as to how many water towers are currently in use around the world, but not being exploited to generate this sort of power. If, and I do say if, since I have not run any tests myself, if it is the case that the ability to generate any excess of energy from the movement of water using just 200 watts or any other amount is the key to energy independence. My position is it would make for a great experiments to test the theory on any scale, because at any level or scale, if the motion of a significant weight of water creates any amount of excess, we just solve the energy crisis. Now, is that not worth the effort of one water tower owner to try? You could of course scale it down to a 50-gallon barrel and try a home-based system. And if you thought this was the end, then you would be mistaken. The spiral impeller initiated the cyclonic or vortex movement within a stagnant tank of water. But what if the water was already in motion? Those water wheels throughout history were and still are stuck in the two-dimensional view of the world. Those flat fins or buckets turn the wheel as water passes underneath. But we know from Viktor Schauberger's work and the mind of Walter Russell, the ebb and flow of creation, and thus nature is one of implosion for force and explosion for degeneration, and the cycle repeats itself endlessly. I have certainly not finished yet, as I said. What if we were able to put the water in a vortex motion before we extracted the energy from it? No water wheels needed, and for the many of us who don't happen to have a water tower at hand but do have running water nearby or on our land, there are those who have stopped using the traditional water wheel and tapped into the vortex power of implosive force of nature. But before I get to that and further revelations of efficient energy generation, and for those of you lucky enough to have water flowing on your land, you're going to want to hear what I have to say and show you a little while from now. But before I get there, please consider becoming one of my supporters, by subscribing, sharing, and hit that bell for notifications. And for the price of a cup of coffee, yes, it all adds up, you can support this channel via Patreon, PayPal, and Bitcoin, or by hitting the PayPal button in the banner above. And for those of you who wish to get more of my healing and meditation videos along with my psychology tips and advice about life, please consider subscribing to Third IQ. I'll leave a link in the description below. And if you wish to get a podcast version of all my future episodes and want to support my work, therefore I become your employee, then please consider joining my members only area on Gaia Uni and get exclusive content for only $5 a month, including Walter Russell's book at a discounted rate, which will help my ongoing research and video productions. My members area, which will include more than just podcasts and ebooks and other videos, will not be available on any other platform. And if this episode was ever to disappear, I suggest you either download it now or continue to have access to it within my members area only of my website. I'll leave a link in the description below. Just consider letting me work for you. With that being said, back to the mistake of traditional water wheels and the tapping into the spiral energy of implosive movement of water. I found a video on power generation that places the step of initiating the spiraling movement of water before it hits the wheel or the impeller pump. The course of the water was changed to mimic the natural spiral we have been discussing. Take a quick look at these clever gentlemen from Chile. So here we have producing 15 kilowatts, and you can see the offshoot there with the little gate producing 15 kilowatts, 1.8 cubic meters a second at 1.7 meters high. And there is the flow you can see as far as the spiral is concerned, being shaped. So it's creating the vortex with the impeller pump sitting right at the bottom, being spun by the action of the water, producing 15 kilowatts of power. And there they are, just starting it, and the debris is getting flushed through, as you can see there, and producing that kind of power by creating the vortex before it gets to the impeller pump. So a new type, well, I say a new type, but a fantastic water wheel. Now, I can only imagine how much more efficient that pump would be if it was actually a spiral pump and not still based on 2D engineering. And as they say there, look at that, installed in Chile, and it's flat. So as you saw there, if you have any flowing water and can enhance rather than interrupt that flow by introducing the spiral as you step down the water course, you no longer need a two-dimensional water wheel. The faster the flow, the tighter the curve needs to be, the greater the implosive force, the higher the energy output. The speed of the wind near the eye wall is greater than the outer or higher winds. This is an easy way to imagine the implosive force of the spiraling of water energy generation. Think about the idea that, as Jay mentioned when discussing his Lily impeller, if we change the shape of the wind turbines from the entropic two-dimensional designs we currently have to the natural three-dimensional shape of nature, the implosive force would be magnified just like the sun's rays when using a magnifying glass on wood. So if you're lucky enough to have flowing water on your property, you may want to install and encourage the spiraling of water and a small Lily impeller to maximize the implosive force you're creating. And who knows, you may generate enough to turn not only the pump itself independently of your household supply, but put the extra back into the house since the water is already in motion. Our two heroes of history, Walter and Viktor, have given us everything we need to become energy independent by shaping water the way it wants to flow. Russell's mechanics of creation and Schauberger's observations makes understanding the complexities of nature easier than we are currently taught, especially with the confusion of complex comparisons and calculations which only explain the exhalation or the explosive aspects of nature or the Big Bang. Our science has jumped on the effect of nature as we see it, not the cause, as Russell had explained. This is the fundamental problem with how we see the world. The idea of the Big Bang was, and always will be, only half the story, and unfortunately, it's the wrong half. Our systems have ignored the causes, and in order to understand these causes of nature, once you drop the artificial complexities of explosive degeneration, which falsely assumes entropy, and of course it would if one were not aware of the other half of the equation. But it's a bit like you witnessing someone hitting another person and telling the police you saw them assault somebody. In reality, that other person attacked the other one you saw with a knife and he was defending himself. But you missed the first part of the event. What we actually saw was the reaction, which we missed was the action that prompted it. Science has, in my opinion, stepped away or stepped in halfway through the event in an effort to explain the whole. It witnessed the effect and has paid little or no attention to the cause. My simplistic view of what Walter was saying is this: all things, all life, all mediums, all psychology from mind to universal matter all function within the same mechanics of operation. It is not and has no need to be explained in complex equations. It all operates within three-dimensional space, geometry, and can even be shown in 2 dimensions as a drawing rather than keep looking for the fabled unifying field theory postulated by Einstein based on effect, not causation. Russell himself said, if you want to know the secrets of creation, all you have to do is know a single wave. It is this wave that represents itself over and over again in all things, and thus is the basis of all creation. He called it a cyclical metabolizing process. Here is a simple image of a single wave. Notice the yin-yang starting point and the progression of expansion and contraction. This is amazingly simple and yet profoundly eloquent. Walter Russell describes it as an inhaling, charging compression, naturally giving way to an exhaling, expanding, discharging, being eternally repeated. This is the construction method for all there is at every level of creation. Is it any wonder why the potential of that compression we see in a vortex tells us we can and should tap into the naturally occurring energy at the point of most compression? The wind speeds at the greatest point of compression are obvious, and the power can be and is devastating. Our current science is simply copying the mechanics of nature disintegration, not the initiation. The explosive, not the implosive, which is the source of contraction and creation, not expansion, which is destruction and death. This episode never was intended to be a video on the potential of free energy, but if we step away from the wrong half of the scientific coin and focus our attention on the causes, not the effects, we currently study in nature and cosmology, we may start to consider the possibility of energy independence from the system which is based on the wrong half of the complete cycle. The entropic half that came in halfway through the event of creation and reported what happened without knowing why. I wonder how many of you will take this episode and use the content to discover for yourself if Walter Russell and Viktor Schauberger was correct. How many will create your own Lilly impeller pump and experiment with inputs and outputs? As I mentioned in previous episodes and mentioned by Walter Russell himself, we only have to look at a single wave to understand the whole of creation, and he is correct. Our capacity to understand is not with maths or equations, but with our own eyes. Do you not think it interesting that some of our greatest minds who cracked the creation code were not mathematicians, but sculptors and artists, were creative right-brain thinkers, not left-brain calculators? As far as I'm concerned, science has given up on the empirical experimentation and sacrificed it to chasing equations, theories and assumptions based on nothing more than half the story, and is left to others to explain the whole picture. Our whole system is flawed, our reasoning biased, and our world on the path towards accelerated entropy brought about by what I can only describe as academics trying to explain the effects we see without understanding the causes themselves. Is there any hope left for us, our children? Well, I think so, since if we were to disseminate the implosive force and practical applications in order to generate energy independence as shown here and use the methods discovered by these heroes of history, then we could see a change as more and more people stop paying for energy and start generating their own. And if it does turn out that we have an over-unity system that can come from moving vast amounts of water by using nature's spiraling impeller or spiraling water before it goes through the rotor, then we are well on our way to dismantling the destructive, explosive, polluting systems and replacing it with constructive, implosive, clean processes. I make no claims as to the established physics and just how many current explosive-based laws, man-made, I might hasten to add, we have the potential of breaking those. And no doubt there'll be those who will comment on the impossibility of such energy generation. However, I, like Walter Russell and Viktor Schauberger, don't actually give a rat's ass about equations based on the wrong side of the coin. And I also like drawing pictures and not making up equations to fit one side of a creation story. Now, if you want to make your own Lily impeller out of a sheet of thin metal, that's easy. Just take a copper or aluminium or aluminum, whichever pronunciation you prefer, or you could just go rip the back off an old fridge. I don't really care. All you have to do, and this is the easy bit, all you have to do is create a crescent moon shape, cut that out and twist it in on itself, and you now have your own spiral impeller fan. What you do with that is entirely up to you, how you connect it, etc, etc. But that's the fastest way in creating that tulip type or spiral fan. There you go, crescent shaped moon, twist it on itself, voila. So please, go out and try for yourself, see what happens and help make this world a better place, because in the end, would it not be nice for generations to come and look back and call us heroes of history?
During hurricanes, twisters, and tornadoes, the same spiraling suction forces are at work, and they can easily lift tons of seawater, whole buildings, or even railroad trains which lie in their path. Imagine what could be achieved if it were possible to produce them by mechanical means. Again, by imitating nature, Viktor developed his suction turbine, or trout turbine, named after his observations of trout moving upstream against the current. The fish is a natural vortex machine. Its open mouth creates a vacuum which propels it forward, and by means of its gills and body shape, a vortex is created around its entire body. Viktor described one occasion on a clear moonlit night when he watched a large trout move into a whirlpool at the foot of a waterfall. As he watched, the trout floated out of this vortex and up the waterfall, as if drawn by an invisible force. In his trout turbine, or implosion motor, water, or air, is guided through a vortex funnel and through specially designed spiral curved pipes toward a central point which forms a strong vortexian motion, condensing and cooling the water. In these pipes, the resultant suction reduces friction and a biological vacuum, or negative pressure, is created and energy is increased. Totally opposed to the plundering of fossil fuels such as oil from the earth, Viktor had said his motor produces its own driving source through the diamagnetic use of water and air. It does not require any other fuel such as coal, oil, or uranium, since it can produce its own energy by biological means in unlimited amounts, almost without cost. This power generator was claimed to have created a strong enough electrical field to light up the surroundings like bright daylight. In the Wasserfaden, or water thread experiment, originally carried out by Lord Kelvin, repeated by Viktor and his son Walter, and now demonstrated publicly by Retta and Walter Baumgartner, the electrical potential of moving water is made visible to the onlooker. The electrical potential of a very fine stream of water is collected to produce sparks and light up a neon bulb. To understand the water thread experiment, let's take a look at this simple diagram. At the top, we have a water tank that has two nozzles, allowing two streams of water to drop down into two bowls or buckets. That's the basic. Then inserted in that, first we have two copper discs, each one with a hole in the center to allow the stream to go through, and two copper plates, one in each bowl, receiving the stream at the bottom. The copper plate on one side is connected via copper wire to the copper disc on the other side, and vice versa, with no connection between the wires. When the streams start to flow, the first thing that's noticed is that the water begins to curve up and tries to reach back to the copper disc. That is, it takes on a levity function and goes counter to gravity. When this experiment is performed in the dark, if a neon bulb is put into the stream, contrary to known laws of electrostatics, it will light up. If a vacuum tube is connected either to the copper plate or the copper disc of either side, it will glow brightly, the brightness depending on the quality or liveliness of the water. If one touches the copper disc, they will certainly get a small shock. This experiment shows the levitational powers of a vortex in the egg shape. This is an egg on a string here, in a stream of water. And we see that the egg's been sucked into the stream and actually rotates opposite to the stream. It's rotating upstream. Again, we'll see that it's sucked in. Unwind. There we see again go in reverse to the flow. This same principle was used by Viktor for experimental flying discs, which were successfully flown during his research in World War II. In the implosion motor, a diamagnetic field was developed which made the lifting power possible. On the 19th of February, 1945, near Prague, the first test of an unmanned flying disc took place. In 3 minutes it climbed to a height of 15,000 meters and attained a horizontal speed of 2,200 kilometers per hour. It could hover motionless in the air and could fly as fast backwards as forwards. This flying disc had a diameter of 50 meters. Another model based on Viktor's prototype was built by a German engineer, Hermann Klaas, in 1941, who reported, "In all truth, this invention flew with almost unbelievable success. It climbed straight up into the air so suddenly that unfortunately it hit the workshop ceiling and crashed to the ground in pieces." In 1934, Hitler had specially requested to meet Viktor and was well informed of his earlier work. Later, during the war, he was given the choice either to develop machines for the Third Reich or he would be hanged. Understandably, he chose the work, and during this time, the Flying Saucer project was initiated. During this period, consideration was also given to biological submarine design. Viktor was against using biotechnology for destructive purposes and probably never released his full designs to the Nazis. However, this may have given rise to the rumors later on that Hitler had escaped to South America in a flying saucer or submarine, that his death in the Berlin bunker was a fabrication. Whatever the truth, both the Russians and the Americans were highly interested in Viktor's work. After the war, the Russians ransacked his apartment and then blew it up to prevent the Allies from gleaning any overlooked secrets. He was confined by the Americans in what was called protective custody for almost a year and was forbidden to take up any further research into the atomic energy fields. He had warned about the danger of nuclear power and called the splitting of the atom an offense against nature. With few resources left to him, Viktor concentrated on agricultural problems. His work was devoted to increasing the Earth's vitality and to encourage the buildup and preservation of the insulating skin of the Earth. He condemned all kinds of artificial fertilizer which exhaust the soil and upsets the delicate balance of nature. Viktor had never turned his back on the ancient farming traditions. Rather, he enjoyed the company of old farmers and a simple country life. He had said, "The old farmer was, for the clod of the earth, both its priest and doctor." In Schauberger's writings, he relates one ancient practice that had survived up to his time, and that was called the practice of clay singing. When Schauberger first heard about this, he went over to visit an old farmer, and he heard the farmers singing, and he thought the farmer had gone mad. He went and checked it out, and he saw him stirring just clear water in a barrel. Get it stirred, get a vortex going in one direction, then reverse it the other way. And he would throw like little handfuls of loamy soil in every now and then. And on the counterclockwise stir, he would sing upscale from very deep bass up to high falsetto, and then reverse that on the clockwise, going downscale. And then this water was taken and sprayed with like a broom, like this, and it would be sprayed around on the land and allowed to dry. And this would leave like a very fine crystalline structure which would help charge up the land organically. This spade was based on Viktor Schauberger's agricultural theories. It's a solid oak spade coated with copper. Now, Viktor noticed that with the decline of the ancient agricultural methods, like the use of the wooden plow, that there came a concomitant decrease in the fertility of the soil. The soil would dry out and not sustain life. Now, Viktor discovered that this was due to the iron plows that were coming into use, cutting the magnetic lines of the earth, and the earth would lose its charge, the water levels would drop. It was just generally detrimental to the plants. And Viktor felt this was a serious problem that had to be looked into. And in his researches, he discovered that copper, when used on farming implements, greatly increased the fertility of the soil and allowed it to remain rich and moist and supportive of life. This patent for Viktor's copper plow was granted in 1950. Many of these golden plows, as they became known, were manufactured, but pressure from the fertilizer industry halted their production. He also worked on this model for a spiral plow, which would move the earth in a centripetal motion, copying the work of a mole as it burrows underground. This type of implement opened up a whole new field of biological machinery for agriculture. But despite his wonderful discoveries, and with increasing bitterness, Viktor realized that all of his attempts to alert the establishment to the breakdown of the ecological order were falling on deaf ears. He had fought all his life for the water, the forests, and the earth itself, but had in return been attacked, persecuted, and impoverished. His health was also failing. It was then that two Americans appeared and offered unlimited funds if he would travel to America and impart his knowledge for the good of humanity. Or so they said. Viktor and his son were flown to Texas and taken to the solitude of the desert, far from his beloved forests and streams. There was no communication with the outside world. The post was censored. The funds never materialized, and Project Implosion, as it was called, became a nightmare experience. Finally, after being tricked into signing everything over to these men, Viktor was permitted to return to Austria. 5 days after he returned home, he died in despair, saying, "They took everything from me. Everything. I don't even own myself." But his message of survival is more urgent than ever before. The only way left is a return to nature.